contracts. We have our speakers, Mr. Ravi Shankar, Dr. Mukul Shastri, and Mr. Mohammed Amir. To begin with, I would like to introduce Mr. Yogen Vaidya, Partner, Forensic and Integrity Services at Ernst & Young. With an extensive experience of 20 years, Mr. Yogen Vaidya is the leader of Dispute Advisory Services with Forensics and Integrity Services at Ernst & Young, India. Here, Yogen leads a team of dispute advisory professionals who include accountants, valuation experts, engineers, quantity surveyors, and quantum experts. In the course of his financial and investigative experience, he has worked with a number of corporates, development agencies, regulators, and other stakeholders to address issues pertaining to fraud, bribery, and corruption. He has extensive experience in oil and gas and manufacturing and industrial product sectors and led various engagements, including arbitration and dispute services, fact-finding investigations, cost overrun, and delay analysis. Prior to joining EY, Mr. Vaidya has worked with companies like KPMG and Larsen and Turbo. And for all our attendees who are there on Zoom, you can also watch this live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube channels. And we are definitely going to have Q&A session by the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, you can always type it down in the Q&A box below. And if you're watching us live on LinkedIn, please send us your question in the comment section below. Now, I'll request Mr. Yogen Vaidya to kindly take over this session. Mr. Vaidya.
Thank you. Thanks, Gayatri. And thanks to World Law Alliance for organizing this particular topic, which is very, very interesting. And we have very interesting and very delightful and specialized August forum today. And I will quickly give the introductions, and I'll also open up the topic a little later. The next 1 hour are going to be very, very interesting, where key aspects on the dispute front is going to be discussed. So let me start the quick introduction, and we have a fantastic panel of panelists here today. I'll start with one of the most veteran in the industry is with Mr. Ravi Shankar Jogannala Gadda. He is a group head of procurement and contracts at GMR Group. He's also an expert in high-value construction project management, commercial and contracts management, and ADR system. And I can see the list, items stipulated in his CV. It's quite long, but he is a veteran in the industry and more than 35 years of experience. And he has seen all across, from the beginning of the infrastructure growth in the country and handled many complex transactions and complex dispute matters. And it will be very, very, our privilege to hear views from Mr. Ravi. We also have with us Dr. Mukul Shastri. He is again very experienced professional on the infrastructure side. He is currently the Vice President, Welspun Enterprises Limited. He has been head of legal in various large conglomerates like KAC International, Adani Ports, SEZ Limited, and is also currently the head of legal, as I said, in Welspun Enterprises. And as part of, again, his stint of over more than 20 years, being on the legal side of the infrastructure industry, he has spent a lot of time in IBC processes, PPP infra projects, claims management, litigation management, legal processes, corporate M&A, and various other regulatory and corporate aspects. And has also, as part of his stint, achieved many, many accolades and won various awards, including Business Leadership Award, Leading Lawyer of 2022, Arun Duggal Award of Overall Academic Excellence. So it will be fantastic to hear Dr. Mukul's views as well. And also we have with us Mr. Mohammed Amir, who is again a veteran in the industry and having more than 25 years of experience and worked with almost, across a variety of projects, developer side and also contractor side. And currently he is heading the contracts in Larsen & Toubro. And he also has a history of working experience as an AVP in Sistra, Lenco, GMED, Hindustan Power Projects Limited, JP Group, etc. So in all put together, we have a fantastic co-panelists today and very interesting topic. So let me begin the presentation and we'll go into the specific intricate aspects of today's topic very, very soon. So in order to set the context, I will just take around 7 to 8 minutes in order to lay down the foundation for today's discussion is, on the topic of mitigating dispute risk in contracts. And primarily I'll use some trends, and Ruma, if we can go further. I'll talk about the three things with why it is very, very important. Again, I'll keep giving examples of infrastructure industry, because that is where quite a few large complex transactions are taking place, large contracts which goes on for a longer term, and where the real problem which arises in the infrastructure industry is difference between the situation on the ground when the whole RFP, etc., or the bidding document is prepared, and when a contractor or the developer are getting into execution part of it, and where they find differences or variations to the original ground conditions, what was envisaged at the time of the contract. And that is where the whole thing starts. So we'll time and again, we'll give examples of infrastructure industry. But obviously, since there is so many activities, even on the M&A front, whether it is ed tech sector or whether it is the whole fintech sector, we are observing as currently, this topic is equally relevant for other industries, like I mentioned, including pharma industry as well. We'll also delve into the key aspects of what really triggers these disputes. And we'll also seek views from the panelists here. What are they observing, and is there any way we can handle some of these things while doing the contracting, while doing the negotiation, while doing the documentation, etc. We'll hear views of the panelists as well. And what are the key mitigating strategies, which is the heart of today's discussion. We'll also talk about why the contract is getting executed when the ongoing thing is there. So at that point in time, what are the 2 or 3 things specifically people who are specifically on the side of contractor or the developer side should really implement and should really look for while building up documentation, while executing the whole contract, so that if there is any, first of all, try to avoid any sort of a dispute situation. And in case of a fatal consequence of a dispute, then how do they really take care of such dispute situation? So with these 3 things in mind, I'll just open up the topic. So Ruma, let's go to the next slide. So if you really see why this topic is very, very important, the kind of announcement which is done by the government of India, and the kind of numbers, the growth predictions, the trajectory in terms of the development of the infrastructure industry, or even real estate, the numbers speak for itself. That is the kind of growth we are envisaging. And with the amount of thrust in the investment which is being committed by the government, whether it is road sector or real estate or infrastructure and various other metro projects and various other announcements which happens time and time, and there is large number of investment which also goes on in the PPP segment, and that's where a lot of problem arises. If you look at the middle bucket, where clearly you see the amount of funds which is currently lying blocked in terms of arbitration proceedings. And that is one of the options which people are currently considering as an alternative dispute resolution to the conventional method of the courts. And currently that is the number which is stuck right now in the arbitration proceedings. So whether it is, as part of the execution of the arbitration proceedings or award, or questioning the award itself in the courts, and that's where the long process is really not yielding the result which it is obviously when it was started, around 10 years ago in India. And we people felt that, yes, arbitration is here to stay. And that is the right mechanism or best mechanism from an alternative perspective. But probably it is not still getting matured or good enough from yield or an effectiveness perspective. And thirdly, the key thing, and I will give one anecdotal example here, where currently, typically it is said that on an average around 7 years it takes in India to get a justice, whether it is arbitration courts or otherwise, as far as the infrastructure projects is concerned. So I was talking to one of the CEO of a large infra company, and he said, look, we always charge premium on various projects, but typically we deliver in time. And that is where I'm sure my co-panelists will also speak on this very, very intricate aspect, that really people are delivering the projects, or people are delivering projects in time. What is really key? And that will become one of the key aspects in the whole discussion today. So the question is, yes, really, because of this increased opportunities and complexity involved in such large infrastructure project, most of the times, almost like 50 to 60% of the time, people feel that yes, it will result in some contractual dispute in some nature, and it will result into delays. It may result into claims, etc. Ruma, let's go to the next slide. So again, I think key aspect again would be to really delve into what are the key reasons. I'm sure that my co-panelists will also speak about this in detail, that what are the prime reasons people are feeling in. And I can tell you that in today's time, at least some of the large public enterprises and large government departments are actually doing the study to look at their contracts in last 15 years or 20 years. What really caused the concern and what are the emerging causes for all the claims and delays? So whether, and typically, as I said, this is all starts with the whole feasibility study, and when the contractor is actually start doing the execution, at that time, if there are any changes he is perceiving or is observing from execution perspective, whether it is change in the ground conditions, weather conditions, changes in scope, approaches, etc. Again, whenever there is a delay happens because of whatever reason, whether delayed approval of design or access to the condition to the sites, or delayed approvals, etc., ground clearances, etc. And any delay will have a larger repercussions from a price escalation, from inflated cost and overheads and various other practical aspects perspective. So we'll also go into the details of some of this reasoning and try to understand from the co-panelists as well that how do we really get into fixing the issues when it arises on site. Roma, let's go to the last aspect. So very quickly, and I obviously started my career with infrastructure, but in between I also had pleasure to work on the manufacturing side. And I always do this comparison. Whenever I compare the infrastructure industry with the manufacturing setup, I always see that from a controls and environment systems perspective, the infrastructure industry is quite far off from the complexity, from the sophistication what manufacturing industry is enjoying from the availability of systems, controls, etc. So that is where it starts. And if we really compare the kind of transactions, values, etc., we see a huge amount of potential out there, whether it is the quality of the manpower, etc. And typically all the sites are at remote places, and availability of good labor, good quality, people, deployment of good quality people are always challenges. And at the same time, we are talking about digitization, right? So whenever digitization comes, obviously there is a little or significant improvement, I would say, we have seen in terms of plant and machinery, digitization of the equipments at site. But really, how do we really, is there any integrated way to manage the whole contract, which takes care of everything, obligation, facilities, various capturing of the milestones, capturing of various milestones and all the obligations which are really required to be tracked, both from a client perspective and also from a vendor or subcontractor's perspective, because most of the time there are back-to-back contracts with the large EPC or a subcontractor, equipment provider or a labor provider. And same way, there is no integrated system which is developed, which will take care of all the 6 aspects, whether it is scheduling, cost, quality, safety, compliance, etc. And is there any way we can do an early warning system whereby we can target or track all issues which I spoke about in the earlier slide, and why the issues are emerging, so that we are able to arrest those issues quite early, with nip in the bud, as we always say, and try to avoid the larger ramifications or the values to go off from a claims delay and any other point perspective. So most of the companies, at least I have seen in India, in last 2 to 3 years, are more talking about the proactive management of managing these contracts in an integrated way, so that they are able to address these problems quite much in advance. So I thought this topic also I will lay over for the panelists to consider. Ruma, let's go to the next slide. So obviously, this will include the whole online repository of contracts. So currently, you see most of the sites, etc., would be running on a manual basis. I have seen even sites more than 1,000 crore, which are still managed on an Excel sheet. They will have all the aspects. Those Excel sheets are quite sophisticated enough to sort of track all the milestones and the tracking of various obligations, etc., which I mentioned. But I think the time has come really to convert it into a full digitized form, so that wherever people are there, whether it is in head office or regional office or at sites, are able to track all the obligations very, very clearly in an integrated manner. Ruma, let's go to the next slide. So again, like I mentioned, there are two aspects in the mitigation, and I'll just have two more slides, and and then we'll start the panel discussion. So obviously, the idea is to avoid and prevent such dispute to happen. But again, when the dispute happens, what are the 5 things are really required to do? And typically, I have seen, at least in the industry where the planning guys or the contract guys are operating, all the typical sort of correspondences or documentation wherever are required to be done at the right time. If it is not done in that fashion, then obviously when something goes wrong, and at that point in time we want to do the course correction, change the tone of the communication, etc., it will be very difficult. So it is always better to have a very balanced sort of approach in communication right from the beginning, not in a confrontational way, but in a way where it really helps to set the right context, to put the facts in an appropriate manner. Because from a forensic perspective, whenever we are brought in to look for evidences when such dispute happens, from a factual perspective, from a chronology of events perspective, it becomes very, very difficult, because none of those correspondence or emails are in place at one go, because of the disjointed systems. People don't use correspondence which are linked to various aspects of the WBS. So that is where the whole thing starts. Secondly, there is a huge attrition and turnover of people at site. That is, again, the lack of information, whether it is in your favor or against you. Most of the times we are actually working in the dark. So that is the second aspect. And third aspect I've always seen is people are not deploying the sophisticated tools like relativity, brain space, in order to identify the right sort of evidences in order to prove or disprove the breaches as alleged in the dispute scenario. And the last aspect, I would say, Roman, let's go to the next slide. I think in the interest of time, I'll just talk about financial modeling. And this is, again, very, very important aspect as part of any mitigation strategy, which lawyers and contractors, come up with, where what are the 5-6 things typically you will have as part of your dispute, as various issues, whether it is change in scope, inflation, overheads, or loss of profit, loss of productivity, loss of opportunity at times. So what are the push and pull you can really do with whether you're developer or with your contractor, where you are very strong, where you are weak, which point is really maneuverable. So that sort of a financial modeling, at least I've seen in last 2 to 3 years, where people, while developing the whole strategy, are using the scenario analysis in order to really come to a conclusion that, let's say, out of 5 we are ready to move with 2, and we cannot leave the other 3 at any cost. So typically that is where I would pause here, and we'll open up the panel discussion. I thought it will be very useful to set the context and go into the important aspects of today's discussion on mitigating dispute risk in contract. So let me begin with Amir here. So like I mentioned, in order to develop these strategies, right? So Amir, as you are quite experienced, and if you can share your views, what are the 2 or 3 things typically will come to your mind, which will come to you as a strategy in order to mitigate the dispute risk from a contract perspective? Amir, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. Thanks again. It was a wonderful presentation at your end, and it gave lots of insight of the contracts management and the disputes that arises and the mitigation possibilities and all that. It is a wonderful presentation you have given, and 50% of our, you can say, the thoughts you have already covered. Anyway, see, what is a dispute? Dispute is basically a disagreement between 2 parties. Okay, and first understand that. And when it arises when there is a ambiguity or discrepancy, or there's not a clarity in the contract agreement in the interpretation. So basically, the foremost thing, the contract should be drafted in that way that it has the clarity of interpretation, and it should govern all the clauses. There should be no ambiguous or ambiguity should be there, and there should be no room left for the interpretation which is not written in the contract. So first of all, the writing that right contract and drafting. So how dispute arises? I give you a few examples. First of all, the employer's requirements are not enough. Suppose we are entering into EPC contract and the employer is floating the tender, and there the employer's specifications are there on which basis contractor has to construct a EPC project and deliver. But there's a few clauses and few paras are missing, or there's uncertain, or there's a very copy paste things are there. So in that, what happened when contract enter into the field and start producing the designs and all that? So those disputes and variations comes. Now, if variation is not settled, contractor will enter into claim. If claim is not settled, it will enter into disputes. So how this dispute arises? There are many ways of handling the project. There are very good projects going on in India which are having very less disputes and very good project, you can say, on schedule. First of all, the right of access is the one thing that always creates a dispute in a contract, because what happens that in a hurry of floating the tender, bringing contractor on board, starting the work and all that, due to many reasons, maybe political also, so it be rushed to the project. Okay, though land is not there. So what happens that FedEx 2.1 provides all the provision of delay in handing over the land, or there the one-sided clause that there would be no cost implication would be provided, only time would be grabbed. This again raise the claims and disputes and majorly enter into litigation and all that. Second factor is the design factor. Who is having the obligation of the design? Whether employees are having obligation, contracts having the obligation, clear credit design factors. If a specification, basic specification is given, so how clear those are? Third thing, the foremost thing, the basis of the extension of time granted. Extension of time claim is the, you can say, the most expensive claim for an employer, because once you grant the time, you have to pay the escalation, there would the cost overrun, there would time overrun. So under 8.4 FIDIC, granting the extension of time. So how this EOT can be, you can say, raised due to many factors, maybe change in design, due to land issue, due to the unfavorable geotechnical conditions. Yeah, now I'm coming to geotechnical conditions. What happens that we do a very preliminary geotechnical investigation at the time of the bidding, and once the contractor brings on is brought on board, and he does the, because design is in his scope, he does the detailed geotechnical specification, he finds that things are not matching with that. So what happens? It again triggers. So basically mitigating, having said all these things, my way of mitigating the disputes is there should be, you can say, enough time should be given to the bidding process. There should be a standard design available. There should be time spent on the employee's requirement. There should be well drafted clauses of each FIDIC clauses, right from including the arbitration. Some contracts you will see there is no place of arbitration written. There is no clarity on the, only one line is written that it would be handled by arbitration reconciliation 1990s and amendment thereof. This is not enough clause. You have to place the how to arbitrators to be selected, how what is the place of the arbitration, how it will govern, whether it would be you can say ICC arbitration or Indian panel arbitration, or the center would be Singapore. So people are doing in industry that they are doing the international competitive bidding, and they are putting the arbitration place in Delhi. So it is not again a fair thing. Okay, you are bringing an Italian firm in India and you're asking to conduct arbitration in Delhi. So there are a few things. And lots of backup is available. World Bank contracts are there, standard FIDIC contracts are there. And the most important part is SCL protocol. Okay, SCL protocol defines the perfect things for the delay analysis and the forensic delay analysis and everything. So those all things should be governed through SCL protocol in the bidding document. This gives the clarity when any dispute arises. So what happens, there are so many issues that what method of extension of time method I will adopt, whether I will go for the window analysis, whether I go the impacted plan, then that again dispute. See, avoiding the litigation is the thing. The arbitration, I'm not saying is a bad part. Arbitration is this facilitating, and arbitration is the one thing that settled the issue amicably, basically on the basis of the facts. But when you enter into litigation, the project suffers, the employer suffers, the contractor suffers, and unnecessarily there would be, you can say, delay in other projects also. So these are my way of thinking that clarity in the document is the foremost thing that we have to take care at the bidding itself. Ravi sir can further throw some light on this.
Yeah, very good afternoon, Deven. Thank you, Yogen. Thank you for a good, you have set the context very well. Thanks, Amirji. Yes, actually, the appropriate contract document is something that is the basis. Like by the definition of this, panel discussion today, what we are trying to do is mitigating the contractual disputes. If the contract is proper, you automatically reduce the number of disputes, and then the natural mitigation process happened. The one point that Amir raised is like following a standard contract. Instead of client writing his own English, his own form of contract, have a standard international acclaimed, maybe FIDIC is well accepted across the globe. But unfortunately, most of the organizations, I saw it in the Middle East, I saw in countries like Australia, I'm seeing that in India today, wherein the SCC, the special conditions of contracts are bigger than the general conditions of contract. So like you are making a fun out of the standard FIDIC model itself, only because you have an opportunity. Therewise, then you are again opening many windows in the building, and then disputes will come. Definitely they will come, because contract is all about an employer is appointing a contractor because he is unable to manage the uncertainties. That is the reason he is appointing a contractor, correct? Indirectly, what he is doing is the employer is sharing the obligations with another person, another entity. So that is to be the shared obligation should be appropriately captured in the contract in true spirit. We generally call in legal terms, we call it as addendum. What I think and what employer think, what a contractor thinks and what an employer thinks, on the day they enter into the contractor, they should be on the same page very clearly. There cannot be some sort of assumptions between the parties, or there cannot be some issues that are not resolved before they get into contracts. And then coming to take forward what Amir has raised, the designs part, the scope of the design, and the definition of the requirement, employer's requirement. Similarly, the ground conditions. These two are major causes for disputes at a later stage. But to encompass all these things, what I would probably have already gone into little extra of what is being asked. I look at a proper communication protocol between the client and the contractor, so that if at all there are issues, they are raised appropriately, and then the attempt is made to resolve those issues in the appropriate forum. And I'm very sure, given an opportunity, both the parties, the intent will not be to go for a dispute at that stage. As and when the issue comes, Yogan also raised this point in his discussion. Nip the issue in the bud stage itself. Don't allow that to snowball into a bigger issue. And also, we all understand, we are all typical, as a human being also. If you can absorb, you can bite the bullet, you will do. But should there be a requirement to fight, you fight for everything that is on the table. You don't limit to the trigger itself. Probably you will include all the earlier issues also in the dispute, and then dispute what should have been 10%. The dispute would be a 40%, 50% larger. So nipping the issue in the bid with appropriate communication protocol between the parties, and at the end of the day, parties should be, again I'm repeating, parties should be reasonable with each other. I cannot be I cannot just take a stand that I'm a client. I cannot just take a stand that I'm a contractor. Only because I'm a contractor, I can hold the client from completing the project till he agrees with what role I want. That sort of stand contractor cannot take. At the same time, client also cannot think that I am the boss, I am paying the contractor, I am the master, and the contractor is servant. So once this sort of attitude is not there between the parties, the contract gets appropriately implemented. And I should have started with a disclaimer. On behalf of the panel, I just want to tell that all the opinions, all the views that we express are as professionals we are doing it. And then probably the organizations that we represent should not be, involved in this. All the opinions are exclusively by us as a professional. I just wanted to say that. Yogan, back to you.
And absolutely, I think it's very well elucidation, both Ravi and Amir. I think I will quickly summarize. The whole, the appropriate communication part of it, and the analogy which you took on the shared obligation, I think absolutely you hitting on the nail there. And that is where the biggest issue arises, where there is no clarity or really well-defined sharing of obligation between all the parties. Second point, what you touched upon is the unresolved issues. And that is what gives rise to wherever there are unclear territories in terms of grant conditions or who will actually provide all the utilities, etc., during the construction period until all the utilities are up and running. No assumptions, I think also you really make very clearly. So that is where the role of contracts and the legal team comes in play. So it's not a job where some individual person sitting in a quiet air-conditioned room will be able to come up with the contract conditions. But it's a culmination and it's a teamwork where planning guys, the contract guys, legal guys, and also the business guys are coming together and then trying to hit on each and every clauses as part of the DPR and trying to visualize what could be the problems which may come, whether it is geotechnical conditions or changing ground conditions or right of access, like Amir mentioned earlier. All those aspects will be really taken care of. So I think fabulous articulation on both what can really trigger and what are the major pockets where the disputes are arising and what are the key mitigating strategies in order to avoid such issues to come. Whether it is, again, Amir went into the details of explaining what is the method of claim. And I think the best part, which will also go to large professionals who are attending this program, is Amir also spoke about various standards like FIDIC, the World Bank contract, SCL protocols, and typically all these things we use on a day-to-day basis, whether it is part of the dispute or it is part of the drafting of the contract, where all these standards are making it really, really reliable and acceptable. But the reality comes like what Ravi mentioned, that when the SCC, the special conditions of contract, the volume increases vis-a-vis the main contract. And that is where how typically we say that if you do a lot of customization in terms of your SAP implementation, etc., then you are actually converting the whole ERP system into a data entry accounting program. And that is where the real problem lies. So I think we begin fantastically well. So let me spend some time on, how do we, if we want to pick up two areas, right, before I move over to Mukul and talk about some of the other intricate aspects, I'll just request both the panelists, Amir and Ravi, to spend a couple of minutes on how, apart from whatever we already discussed, how do we really avoid, or is there, practically speaking, we can't really avoid everything, but is there 2 or 3 things you want to suggest to the attendees? What are the 2 or 3 things, apart from what you already told, can be used to avoid some of these issues to come up?
Yeah, I have a plan. I take a role of a client, and then Amit takes the role of a contractor. In fact, we are today on these roles. I'll just take, if somebody takes the role of a client, because contract has 2 sides, and then it should be some sort of a balanced contract. So that's the reason I suggested because 2 of us are there handling managing this point. So we'll take this as a client. Somebody should write a balanced contract. Tomorrow, as a client, if I say that the approval of drawings, it should take 5 days. For a reason, if I take a 6th day, this is what I pay you. This is what is the benefit, or this is what is the risk. Whatever is the additional cost that you incur, this is why I'm reimbursing that to you. And similarly, if there is a delay attributable to you, this is what I penalize. So the issues, the cost and the cause and effect should be very clearly written in the contract. And it is very like in some of the contracts, you see that all the preliminaries are defined. All the running costs per day are defined. And then for my reason, if the contractor is staying on site for 10 days, per day, how much I have to pay will be stipulated in the contract, no ambiguity. And the deployments done by contractor are appropriately recorded in the weekly, monthly, daily reports that the contractor submits. So it's not too difficult. And as a client, the client should be able to take the uncertainties in the contract, because contractor came into the contract considering a framework of rules, a framework of given situation. Should there be corona effect? Should there be some sort of a force majeure issue? So that issue should be very clearly mentioned in the contract. And parties should take that. I already said this point earlier. Parties should take a reasonable approach. Parties should not try to outsmart each other. Here, everyone is smart enough. Everyone is smart enough. Big, small doesn't make big difference. Everyone is smart enough. So parties should take a balanced view on the issue, and then each of the parties should assume that if I'm not reasonable, I'm going to face a dispute which will be more costly, which will be more time and energy consuming for me. Probably that sort of approach parties should take to mitigate or to discourage risk, these sort of claims getting escalated over time.
Yeah, Ravi, I think it's a very good insight you have given. Had it been identified by both the contractor and employer long back, so there won't be a dispute or arbitration, and arbitration lawyers would have gone leave. Okay, but this is the, you can say, hard fact that this will always remain there as long as construction industry and infrastructure development is there. Disputes will be there, gaps would be there, failures would come. There would be lots of, you can say, efforts to minimize the disputes, but dispute would still be there. I would simply say there are 20 clauses. Yogen, there are 20 clauses in FIDIC. 90% of the contracts in India is now based on FIDIC. Okay. Out of 20 clauses, 10 clauses are definition in the process and the procedures. Okay. So there are only 10 clauses remaining on which we fight. Okay. I can count on fingers. Okay. Clause 2.1, clause 5, clause 13.7, clause 8.4, clause this, clause that. I can count on fingers. Employer knows that these are the areas where contractor plays. Contractor knows that I will play in these areas. But still, contract document, the bidding document is not that sound, is not that foolproof, that who can mitigate at the bidding stage itself. Okay, there's the reason. First of all, we should have a very fair and reasonable approach from contractor side and employer side, both. Okay. Once we are floating the tender, we know our house, we know our site, we know our disputes, we know you can say, we can easily foresee the risk, what may come up, a contractor can foresee those risks. And we have to accept those risks, and we have to see, there are various methods of handling the risk. Either you transfer it, mitigate it, accept it. So why I'm saying whether you transfer it or accept it. Okay, if you are accepting, if you are saying that, okay, right of way for this particular station building, I will not be able to give you 2 years. And the moment I'll give you this right of way for this building, your zero date will start from that date itself. And our baseline schedule will be based on that. What is the harm in that? Okay. But when you float the tender, that the baseline schedule comes down the zero date for that station also. But you know that the 2 years down the line, you will get the land. So there are many facts. What I'm trying to say, I'm not favoring the contractor, I'm not favoring the employer. I'm just trying to bring everybody on board on the one platform and say, let's have a fair and reasonable approach. Whatever we have, whatever risk we have, be clear in that whether we are carrying this risk, whether we are mitigating this risk, whether we are transferring this, how we are handling this. The second thing, contractor has always the opportunity in pre-bid queries to handle their, you can say, the risk and the disputes and the foresee he see that may come up. And I would say that pre-bid queries, half of the issues can be resolved in pre-bid queries, because contractor understand the tender. They always go with hundreds of queries to the employer that please resolve here itself, because pre-bid query is a part of contract. Okay, if these are resolved then and there, which is not covered in the tender document, half problem solved. Okay, but writing in that tender condition would prevail is inviting the risk and the dispute. Okay, yeah. So few things I would trying to say that fair and reasonable approach. And I give you the one solution, Yogen, in this conference, on which basis the arbitration lawyer will change their, you can say, profession and start doing something else. Start doing the integrated project delivery system. It has been adopted in US. It has been adopted in Canada. It is the new concept bringing in Europe. Integrated project delivery is the system in which you can say contractor, employer, consultant, PMC, MEP, all sign one contract. They become one party, one stakeholder, no cross claims on each other. Okay, they sign one contract, they deliver the project within a defined budget. Their even cost of the, you can say, fixed, but profit is not fixed. If there's an over cost run, their profit will be reduced, others' profit will increase. There is an X value that has to be spent on the project. That X value cannot go beyond X.1. So this is a very new concept has come in US, Canada. In Canada, it came in last 10 years. US, they have adopted 25 years. But construction is very successful and there's a very less dispute in integrated project delivery system. Once we agree, as a, you can say, good boys, that we are signing integrated project delivery contract as a consultant, as a contractor, and an employer, and we will be working on the same conference room, sitting as a same stakeholders of this project. There won't be no dispute in construction industry. Otherwise, it will come.
Very, very interesting.
That is similar to aliens contracting. It was that
yes.
Some tested earlier, but it was not so successful in India. It was tested in, I think, 3 big projects. It was tested in India by an Australian company. That was not so successful. But yes, actually, it should be an ideal thing wherein there is a target cost estimate and teams collaborate with each other to beat the target cost estimate, and then to complete the project well within time, within the budget cost, and then improve their margins. Improve their money, every stakeholder's margin. Yes,
absolutely. So before I move on to Mukul, I completely agree with both of your comments, and the key aspect is being reasonable and fair to each other. And I can share my experience as well. In last 2 to 3 years, there are many matters where we have been engaged as expert determinant. So very rarely that happens in India. And few matters where we were involved, both the parties very, very fair to each other, very reasonable. We decided on a particular. It was not very contentious matter from a legal perspective, but it was more to do with the numbers, which comes from the accounting system. So that's the best way which the arbitrator deflected it to a accounting firm like us, and both the parties accepted the position, because we were trying to reconcile the positions, and which is based on facts. So there is nothing to interpret or nothing which is unclear. And at times also I have seen in last couple of years, including in the PPP contracts, where transactions are with some of the government departments, where people are opting for out-of-court settlement. So your comment is absolutely valid on being reasonable and fair to each other. Otherwise, this will go on endlessly to high courts and Supreme Courts, and people will not get justice. So absolutely true. So I think very importantly, what Amir and Ravi mentioned about the contracting side, where things has to be absolutely clear. So let me bring in Mukul here, and he has spent a significant amount of time while handling these matters on the legal perspective. So we would like to hear, Mukul, your views on how do we really handle this various stages of contracting from a legal perspective, so that the whole clarity which we can bring in the contract is improvised, and we can reduce this dispute scenarios, which is the whole right from the life cycle of project conception, tendering, bidding, pre-bidding, what Amir mentioned earlier, contract finalization, execution, and the closer perspective. If you can share your thoughts on that, Mukul.
Thank you, Yogen. First up, thanks the World Law Alliance and the team for having me here. Wonderful session. It was great listening to the pearls of wisdom by Mr. Ravi Shankar and Mr. Amir. Very wonderful thoughts, and a very interesting thought that can we just do away with lawyers. It's a utopian world. Only thing is, if that happens, really, then I have to find some new job. But then, so given my experience, and as Yogen said, that let me share what I have to share from my experiences. I have spent some around 10, 12 years, decade in the infrastructure sector, and prior to that, I was in the finance sector, and before that, I was a litigating lawyer. So I'll just share 2 anecdotes, and then I'll come onto the topic. First of all, very interesting point that Yogen raised in his initial slides, that see the average time for an arbitration, it takes 7 years, is what Yogen said. And in my own experience, I'll just tell, in 2002, arbitration came in India in 1996, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, thereby, and they have this ICADR so that they can promote arbitrations in India. Way back in 2002, 2003, for all these ad hoc arbitrations, we have to apply for Section 11 petitions before the High Court. And I was a young litigating lawyer, and I had one client, and I applied for a Section 11 petition. And it took me 14 months just for the appointment of an arbitrator, and ultimately I lost the client. And this was way back 2002, 2003, 20 years back, 2 decades back. But even today, very recently for my own, right now, for Wellspun, I have to appoint some arbitrator. And my previous date was in April in Punjab, and High Court next date is in August. So you see, even that Section 11 thing has not improved. For even appointment of arbitrator, that is just to initiate the process, it takes months and ages. Therefore, going for arbitration, going for dispute, definitely is no solution. And we have to, as Mr. Ravi Shankar and Mr. Amir has pointed out, we have to find out ways so that we can mitigate those disputes. We can just nip in those disputes and those even things, nip those things in bud, which can give any kind of semblance to dispute. And in an ideal world, utopian world, we can live without disputes. Though it generally doesn't happen, but our endeavor should be as much as we can achieve those things. Now, coming to this, how can we do that? And while I was doing my MBA, we had this friends from army background, and they used to say one very interesting saying that more you sweat in peacetime, less you bleed in wartime. And the same thing applies to a contractual thing also. So if you can conceptualize at the initial time rightly, that what is your contract, what is that you expect from the contractor, what is the perimeter within which the work has to be done, what should be the design requirement, what is the timelines, and it is a very pragmatic and a view whereby both the parties are fair and reasonable to each other. Definitely you can define a very proper and robust contract whereby the chances are that the dispute will be less, will be mitigated. But then in my experience, and especially in infrastructure industry, the contract, irrespective of how you draft it, the lawyers will find out some way or the other, if the client says so, to find some kind of hole into that. I'll give an example for that. I'll give an example of Canada. As Amir said very interestingly, that in Canada and in US, they have integrated contracts, and thereby the disputes are less, which is quite correct. But then, so what happened in my previous organization when I was in KC International, we had clients in Canada, and we had to supply certain materials to them. So basically, it was a power transmission distribution company, and therefore we have all these tower suppliers, tower parts, and those things we used to supply to Canada. And it was to establish a power transmission line in Alberta region, where the temperature is minus 40 degrees generally in winters, heavy winds. The contract was plain and simple, that the contractor is going to give me a certain design, and on that basis, on those specifications, I have to give them the steel material, the tower materials and the cables and all those stuff. Now, what happened is when they install those things, and then they EPC contractor, when they install these towers there, because of the extreme weather, minus 40-degree temperature, all these boards, they popped off, and the steel, it developed crack. And they sued us, they stopped paying us, and they sued, and they encashed a bank guarantee, and they sued us for almost $30 million. Now, the question was plain and simple, that are we liable to this money? Are we liable to pay this $30 million to them as damages or not? Now, they are the employers, we are the contractors. Now, the question is, the design was theirs, the specification was theirs, and if through an expert witness I can prove that I have delivered to you as per the specifications, then I have discharged my contractual liability. Simple, plain contract, expert comes, tells that, okay, as per specification, and it has been given. But then again, whenever things look so simple, things aren't that simple. So there's a contract, the contract specifies, design was given by the employer, and we have supplied as per those specifications. But still, the suit was there, and it went to a very large extent. Ultimately, we won, but they had a very genuine legal point. And what was their legal case? A very simple case. Under the Sale of Goods Act, because it is governed through a Sale of Goods Act, under the Sale of Goods Act, there's a concept called fit for purpose. That whatever, because I am an expert in power transmission distribution, I am an expert seller in these things. So, and I knew the purpose also that this is what the entire thing will be for. And therefore, whatever supplies I have to give, it has to adhere to those specifications, obviously, but that is the basic minimum as per their interpretation of contract and law. But then the entire thing has to be fit for purpose. If you're telling me that I'm telling you that I want a car for racing, and you've given me a particular car, and it adheres to my specification, but again, when I race it and the engine just pops off, then I can still sue you for a poor delivery. So this is what they have made a case of. What I'm saying is, despite a very pristine contract, very clear contract, there is a possibility of disputes because of a variety of reasons. So therefore, we have to, obviously the contract has to be clear, but then again, the interpretation or the wording of the contract has to be vetted by a legal mind, and that legal mind who operates in that particular field. It is very, very important. Otherwise, at times, despite having a clear contract, there is a possibility of dispute, and you can ultimately face bigger consequences. One more small example into this. See, now, again, so now one is when you are making the contract, obviously you have to put a lot of thoughts when you are making the contract, ensure that you define the roles and responsibilities very clearly. But other than that, now, if after the contract has been executed, now when you are going and executing the contract, there is a dispute and you think there is a breach by other side, like the other side, if you are a contractor, the other side is not paying you, or if you are an employer and you find that the contractor is not doing his work properly, or despite your reminders, he is not doing it rightly. So two things becomes very important. Number one is the role of the contracts department. The correspondences and the contractual letters become very important, because ultimately they are going to be the base for your arbitrations later. And I've seen, at least in Indian experiences, our teams in general are very, very poor in documentation and writing. I don't know, because of the relationship, because the project manager has a relationship with the employer or with the independent engineer, and they find it so difficult to write a letter which has all these issues. Even polite letters they will not write. They think it is something, it is like a blasphemous to write these things to an employer. So that is what somehow that thing has to change. You should be polite, obviously, but then polite doesn't mean that you will not write what is rightfully due to you. So that I've seen, and it likewise for employers also. Sometimes the contractor will write something, and employer people will not what you call rebut it or refute it in the manner that they should. So it is both ways, but generally it is more from the contractor side. Because I have been both at the contractor legal department, I have been in the employer's legal department also. And whenever I will do audit of all these things, I'll find, especially when I was with like AAC International, when they are mostly contractors, that our contract department, our team of project manager will not write these letters to the employers. So one is that documentation becomes very important. And second thing, what is important is that they get the right legal advice at the right time. Again, a very small example for that. Like in India, we have a concept of repudiatory breach. This means if the other party is not following its obligation, if it's not discharging its obligation properly, then you consider that as a repudiatory breach, that this person is now repudiating the contract, and therefore you terminate the contract and claim your damages. Now, the delay that you do in this thing, there are multiple judgments, and a very interesting judgment of Madras High Court of Simplex matter, where the court said that in such cases, if you have delayed and you have issued the termination pretty late, then you are only entitled to the damages till the time the breach was the first in your notice. That delay that you have done, once you are first aware about the breach, and when you ultimately terminate the contract, you are not entitled to that delay or that breaches. Why? Because you yourself were at fault at contributory negligence. So therefore, we have to be aware about these nuances also at times, that what and when to write what letters. So that's why these things becomes very important, and the role of the technical people, the contract team, and the legal team becomes very, very important. And there has to be an intertwining or cross-functional dialogue between these three, so that they ensure that the business interests are taken care of. Now, before I just want to, hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Mukul. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I thought that there's some network bandwidth is a problem. So now, before I just go back to you again, I'd like to add one more thing. I totally agree with Mr. Ravi and Mr. Ahmed that yes, now the need is that we have all these technologies, and especially as even Yogen has said in his initial slides, that now is the time when we use this legal tech, like all these smart contracts are there. Let's use these technologies and thereby ensure that we can mitigate these disputes, at least those which we can. See, if the intent is bad of people, obviously you will need lawyers if there's a problem in intent per se. But at least when the intent is not bad and both the contractor and employer are really willing to discharge their roles in a very fair, reasonable manner, at the time, let not these contractual things cause problem to you. And therefore, let's have all these smart contracts things. Because even in my experience in India, how people are monitoring these contracts is just through Excel sheet. It's a very, very manual monitoring, which itself causes problem. Because then obviously, despite good intention, you will miss out on the deliveries. And then you will fight with the employer will fight with you. Okay, now you have to do this in 15 days. You have not done this. Or your milestones will just expire because you are monitoring manually. Whereas now the time has come in today's world where all these legal tech is available, these technologies are there at a very cheaper cost, which can definitely pop things for you. They can just tell you which dates are important, what are the milestone dates, what are the important dates to tell people. Like I've seen in this COVID period, there's a lot of force majeure, but many people, they could not, and most of the force majeure clause will say that in 7 days or 15 days you have to intimate the event. I've seen many people have not intimated because somebody slipped in the entire COVID scenario and all this lockdown to even intimate those things. Obviously, those are technical things and ultimately didn't cause them much wrong. But then problem is, this is a problem when you're doing a manual kind of monitoring of these contracts. And therefore, now the time has come that we use all these technologies for such things. And as Yogan has said about that e-discoveries and those softwares, they're also very relevant. That when you are doing a very complex contract arbitration, at that time also you need all this documentation that has been written, those emails that have been written, and there's a lot of churning of manpower. So a new person doesn't know that what emails have been written, what communication has been there, and therefore these e-discoveries become very important. So that all those things come on just one page based on certain keywords, that you know that okay, this is what I have written to the client, or this is what I have written to the contractor. So those things, definitely we have to use the help of these legal tech to bring forth certain solutions.
Absolutely, Mukul. I think very lucid articulation, very fantastic to the point view from a legal perspective. Aptly said, like waiting by legal mind is very relevant, and particularly who are expert in the field. So not only generic, time has gone off the generic guys, even from a legal perspective. This is a time for people who are specialized in the fields of specific contract are very important. I think another aspect which you touched upon is very apt and relevant is role of contract guys. In drafting correspondence, and I also mentioned initially that people want to be quite right and they don't want to cross that line of sort of politeness.
I'll only add one point. In fact, I was about to say that, but the reason contract management is not taught as a subject in colleges. So that's where the big gap comes. The person could be technically a wizard, but he can't put 4 sentences together in a contractual format. So people have an apprehension that instead of writing a wrong thing, better don't write. That's where it is essential that we teach contract management as a proper full subject in colleges for both an engineer.
People use it as a strategy to say don't say anything, remain silent, and we will be able to maneuver it the way we want.
That's
most of the time,
hesitation.
Absolutely. The lack of evidence itself is questionable at times when there is nothing. You have never created any trail of good documentation. Like Mukul said, it becomes very challenging. So that's again, absolutely bang on. And the intent, like Ravi also mentioned earlier, that reasonableness and an intent is the people have intention to only litigate, and that's the way you generate your claim. And I have seen practically many people who use this intent to generate the claim. So that doesn't work. And the last part, what Mukul mentioned, the use of technology. I think that is, I'll be gung-ho about that, whether it is smart contracting or integrated project management using technology. Right now, I see only on the plant and machinery side of it, but the whole contract execution, like Ravi mentioned, there are no good guys who are able to manage the contract the way it should be, rather than just the Excel sheet. The whole, bringing the smart element into contract management, e-discovery piece, etc., and digitizing the whole contract execution is absolutely key. So I have one more question, and incidentally, it resonates to question which is received from people who are attending. So I'll just read it out and people can respond. Alternate dispute resolution is the future of doing construction business. Less time, less cost, saving man hours, consensual mitigation of differences, thereby not allowing the same to get escalated into conflict that needs to be litigated. Proper ADR, ODR clauses must be incorporated in the contract. It seems more of a command. But again, the corresponding question, larger question is there anything, what are the challenges? We spoke about arbitration, but what are the challenges which we can really work upon in order to improvise the efficacy and the efficiency in the whole alternate dispute resolution process, including arbitration, conciliation? If the panelists can speak about that.
Yeah, I'll just answer in 2 ways. So, and Amir has touched upon that also. He said, and people give a very perfunctory attention to arbitration clauses. They'll just write one-liner, and which is very regular in Indian business.
Exactly.
In fact, I have seen people writing LCIA India chapter. LCIA India has closed shop some few years back, but still they write LCIA India because it is there somewhere written. They'll just copy paste it.
Again,
So
the crux is, please, Mukul, continue.
Yeah. So the idea is that you have to give attention to these things, that what is the right arbitration clause, and now even ODR platforms are available. So they are pretty nascent in their in India at least, and therefore, but there are ODR platforms which can solve most of the disputes which pertains to document only arbitration that can be held through an ODR mechanism. So we can use those things and can settle it out. So definitely we can have a proper arbitration clauses and ODR clauses, and thereby try to resolve these disputes in a much more expeditious manner. I'm going to say something.
Yogen, the idea is, see, contract management is the always, you can say, best tool to avoid the dispute. You will laugh on that. People say that contract manager is sitting to raise the dispute, but I will say contract management is one thing to avoid the dispute. See, there's a given process in that. One dispute education board is there. DAB is there. When DAB is failed, you get an amicable time. When amicable is failed, then you enter into arbitration. Then again, this settlement time and amicable settlement time is there. Then again, you enter into litigation. So there's a long process going into litigation. What happens at the stage of the contract signing, though there's a timeline given in the contract that within 12 months, within 365, you have to appoint a DABs. But consultant contractor, they both avoid to appoint a DB member most of the time. What happens when the dispute arises? They directly approach the court and invoke section 11 that appoint the arbitrator, this thing, that thing. Okay, this happens. Okay, so there's a proper drafting of the clause 20. I'm saying the complete clause 20 of FIDIC, that is the dispute clause of clause 20. First, DAB, how DAB would be formed, who will appoint a DAB, who can be the DAB member, what should be the qualification of the DAB member, how many years of experience have, relevant experience should have. They should close the names of the 3 DAB and can make the part of the, so that any dispute arises, so DAB can be brought in. Now what happens if DAB failed? There's again timeline of the amicable settlement. We have the timeline. Then we should try to settle amicably. Then we can invoke the arbitration and all that. Okay, but arbitration clause should be self-sustainable. It should not happen that when opening the arbitration clause, we don't know what exactly now we have to do. Okay, who will be the arbiter? What is the qualification order? Where will the arbiter center? Under which law it would be conducted and all that. Okay, they should be specifically. Yes, I have seen World Bank contract and DFCC contract. You go for DFCC contract. Ravi Shankar sir has seen that DFCC contract. You have taken the big claims also. So, I would say it is a good clause of well-written clause. I can say arbitration. There won't be any.
Absolutely. So, in the interest of time, we'll move on. There's one more question specifically for Amir, and so I'll just read it out. I heard that you pointed out many reasons for dispute, and one of such is right of access, which is the most critical and generally being invoked by most of the infra players. My question is that while bidding, the developer also undertakes some sort of due diligence and broadly comes to know the issues involved. Knowing this, he works out his strategy and the related cost and also builds contingency. Then why the developer just invokes the right of access issue to raise EOD, even if there is only a small patch where the land could not have been acquired by the government? Why does the developers not finishes the work on the complete lot bearing that patch, instead invokes EOD to safeguard its own non-doings? Isn't it a problem more of builders' mindset?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I would say that this is the one problem that is we face as a contractor, as a employer, almost more than 70-80% of the project. Okay, what happens that the question is very relevant. Why not the employer finishes the land acquisition, then call the tender? That's the one question. Why contractor don't inspect before bidding and raise this issue that your land is not available after awarding the contracts? So it is you can say that everybody is taking care of their own part. Okay, they are the political reasons to start the project, to finish the projects. Sometimes some priority stretches are finished due to some line. So it is not always possible for the employer to finish the complete 100% land acquisition, sit for 2 years and then say that I will call the tenders. But what happens that employer always foresee and envisage that by the time the contractor or the baseline schedule would be prepared, they would be in position to acquire rest of the land. They plan in that way. Some way plan doesn't go well. I would suggest one thing. This is not possible. It is not end to start activity that end the land acquisition start the bidding process. It will never happen in infrastructure industries. It is a parallel exercise. It goes on parallel. But I would say that rather putting that no cost implication would be payable, no extension of time of given under 2.1 should not be written in the contract. If employer knows that contractor would suffer, their plant and machinery equipment would be idle, they will face the idling charges and the hindrances and all that. So reasonable cost and time extension should be given if employer feel that they could not give the land in time. But it is a parallel process infrastructure. We are developing country. We have to live with that.
Yeah, I see one more question from one Sangeeta ji. He says before drafting a signed contract, there can be MOU between the parties. Actually, the RFP document is technically a draft MOU between the like to be contractor and the employer. So Sangeeta ji, the person who is bidding will know how the contract document will look like if he wins the contract. So MOU अलग से बनाने का जरूरत नहीं है.
Right. Thank you, Ravi, for taking it up. I don't think we have any further questions, so maybe we can.
Actually, I had just one point. Actually,
yes.
But somehow it gets into the discussion comes, the contractors and then making claims, and then we see big numbers. Parties should understand. Both parties should understand. A claim is made as in line with the actual excess expenditure incurred by the suffering party, assuming that party A is suffering. Party A suffering is reimbursed to the party. So practically, there will not be any sort of issue of gaining a margin or making a big profit there. They are only insulating their costs. So the best way would be parties sit together across the table and then discuss and then resolve the issue. That is the cheapest, quickest, and the best option. But the way we discuss this sort of things cannot happen. In this world, there will be disputes. So appropriate contract, right contract in good frame of mind is the only solution. And after that, if it goes to dispute, Amir and then Dr. Mukul Sastry already said, how do we, restrict or mitigate risks for either of the parties?
Right, absolutely, sir. Thank you for that. Just the last question, I think it's in Q&A panel. So it says, in fact, many of the employers' personnel have tendency to postpone decisions or refute claims and to rely on decisions by DAB, arbitration, etc. Your views?
Yes, actually, if I say employer, maybe to broader a sense, if it is a government, yes, because the accountability part will be, something instead of taking a decision or, holding a decision, they would prefer the latter for obvious reasons, because they are subject to so many audits, they are subjected to so many, like internal protocols. So if there is an element of risk in the decision, probably a normal, ordinary person will like to hold. But we have seen many people, we have seen R.C. Sinhas, we have seen, our Metromans, Sridharans and all, like who took decisions and then made a name for India, made a name for themselves. So it will be there, but yes, some of them, we all see that type of attitude. Yes.
Actually, I think there is one, maybe we can take this last one, but maybe to Mukul, it's a legal question.
Yeah,
can we have a strict...
Yeah, I added that. So the only thing is, so we have...
Gayatri typed it.
Gayatri typed it? That's okay. So, yes, we can have strict clauses. So we already have strict clauses. And if you mean by strict, that if arbitrator has given the judgment, it cannot be further appealed. So we have similar positions in India. An arbitration award can be challenged only on specific grounds under Section 34. So that has already been taken care of. But then you have to balance it out also. You cannot have, because see, in a democracy, it is, or in any right judicial judicious country, we have to have a very balanced approach. So you cannot have an approach whereby just whatever an order comes, whatever flaws it has to be obeyed. That cannot be the case. And therefore, we have a very balanced approach. And arbitration, once an arbitral tribunal is there, and whatever award has come, that award generally is what is you have to obey that award. And there are very specific ground that it is against public policy, or it has been obtained by fraud, or the matter was not arbitrable, and only on those grounds you can challenge Section 34. And still, after 34, you can go and file certain appeals under Section 37. And Section 36 is about enforcement of an arbitration award, and thereby you can enforce the arbitration award across the country. And now, even various courts have set a precedent that before challenging any arbitral award, you have to deposit some money with the court, sometimes 75%, sometimes 50% of the money. Like in Delhi, this is a practice whereby if you have to challenge this arbitral award, you have to deposit certain amount with the court. So therefore, I feel that thing has been adequately taken care of by the current legal conundrum.
Thank you, Mukul. That's very, very helpful. So in sum and substance, I think we are coming to a closer. So wonderful articulation of thoughts, sharing of experiences, anecdotes, examples, case studies by our distinguished panel today. I'll just quickly summarize. I think key takeaways: clarity on roles of parties without any interpretation, no room for any assumptions, specifically about the shared responsibilities. Both the parties has to be very reasonable and fair to each other. That's the way to avoid any disputes. Clear documentation right from the beginning of the contract with facts without being confrontational. Use of digitization, use of technology, I think that is key in the whole contract management, whether it is e-discovery, contract management, smart contracting, etc. The whole, bringing in the right people, right guys, whether it is technical, legal, experts, etc., at the right time with the right sort of skill set. And bringing in the right people at the right time. I think this is the quick summary of what we discussed today. But this is a very broad topic, and we would be happy to discuss again, get some more opportunities to speak about some detailed aspects of this particular topic. So I once again thank my co-panelists and giving back to Gayatri. Thank you for everybody's contribution on this. Back to you, Gayatri.
Thanks again.
So
Thanks.
before we close this session, I would like to thank Mr. Yogen Vaidya. It's been a great pleasure having you on board, sir. And it's really been a thought-provoking session. And thanks to our co-panelists for their valuable contribution and deep insights on the topic. So thank you all. And we definitely look forward to more such events and collaborations with Ernst & Young and all of you. So thank you so much. And thanks to our participants who took the time to join us for this very interesting session. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.